Marcus Reeves was having the worst morning of his year when he found the last open parking space in the Nexum Group garage. He hit his signal, slowed, started to pull in. A black Audi slid in ahead of him. What happened next he would later describe as a temporary loss of good judgment. He blocked the Audi with his own car, got out and walked up to the driver's window with the full weight of a ruined morning behind every step. The 5 a.m. emergency with his daughter, the 40-minute delay, the all-hands meeting already in progress upstairs where the new CEO was addressing the company for the first time. The woman inside was composed, expensively dressed, and looking at him the way people looked at inconveniences they had already decided not to engage with. He engaged anyway, loudly, honestly, in a way he was not proud of but could not entirely regret. She said nothing. She drove away. Marcus found another spot 3 levels up, sprinted to the elevator, and walked into the Nexum lobby still catching his breath, and stopped cold. On the banner stretched across the reception desk was a photograph. Her photograph. Welcome CEO Naomi Sinclair, Nexum Group. For a long moment, Marcus stood completely still while the lobby moved around him. Then a single thought cut through everything else. In 11 months on the promotion shortlist, he had just introduced himself to his new CEO by screaming at her in a parking garage. If you've ever had a morning where everything goes wrong at once, stay with this story. And if you're new here, subscribe. New videos every week. The morning had started at 5 a.m. with a sound Marcus knew better than his own heartbeat. He was already moving down the hall before he was fully awake, into Sophie's room, hand on her back, feeling the shallow pull of her breathing before he even reached for the light. 8 years old, 43 pounds, and she fought her asthma the way she fought everything. Quietly, like she didn't want to cause trouble. That was the part that gutted him most. She never cried. She just waited for him to fix it. He got the nebulizer running, sat on the edge of her bed, and watched the clock. 18 minutes. Then her breathing evened out, and she looked up at him with his wife's eyes and said, "I'm okay, Daddy." "I know you are," he said. He did not tell her that Dr. Harmon had called 2 weeks ago to adjust her treatment plan. He did not tell her that the new inhaler cost twice what the old one did, or that he had pushed the follow-up appointment back 3 weeks because he needed the next paycheck first. He did not tell her any of that. He tucked her back in, got dressed, and started running an hour behind. Marcus Reeves was 34 years old, a widower, and a senior operations manager at Nexum Group, a position he had held for 2 years while quietly doing the work of a director. His wife Dana had died in a car accident 3 years ago on a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of random, senseless loss that rearranged a person permanently. Since then, it had been just the two of them, him and Sophie, a 1-bedroom they'd upgraded to a 2 when the lease renewed, and a budget that required him to be precise about everything. The promotion to senior director wasn't ambition, it was arithmetic. The salary difference would cover Sophie's medical costs with room left over. It would mean stability, the kind that couldn't be threatened by a single bad month. There was something else he hadn't told Sophie and barely admitted to himself. Dana's parents, Robert and Claire Whitfield, had been quietly consulting a family attorney. The calls started 6 months after the funeral and never fully stopped. Their argument was simple and devastating, that a single father working long hours in a demanding corporate environment could not provide the consistent medical oversight their granddaughter required. They loved Sophie. Marcus knew that. It didn't make the threat any less real. The attorney had sent a formal letter of intent 3 months ago. Marcus had responded through his own lawyer, bought himself time, and told himself the promotion would settle the question permanently. A director's salary, a stable schedule, a demonstrable upward trajectory. It would be enough to close the case. He had been on the shortlist for 11 months. Today was the evaluation review. He had not been late to work once in those 11 months. Until this morning. By the time he dropped Sophie at school and hit the highway, he was 40 minutes behind. By the time he reached the Nexum Tower, the lobby clock read 8:52. 8 minutes to find parking, get through security, and take his seat before the all-hands began. The garage was full. Level 1, nothing. Level 2, nothing. He went back down to the ground level with his jaw set so tight his back teeth ached, and that was when he saw it. The last open space near the elevator, a gift from whatever version of luck still acknowledged his existence. He hit his signal, started to pull in. The black Audi came from his left, moving fast and smooth with the certainty of someone who had never once worried about being late to anything, and slid cleanly into the space before his front bumper crossed the line. Marcus sat still for exactly 3 seconds. Then he pulled his car across the lane, blocking the Audi in, put it in park, and got out. He was aware, distantly, that this was not a good idea. He was also aware that he had been awake since 5 a.m., that his daughter had spent 18 minutes struggling to breathe, that he had a meeting in 7 minutes that could change the financial trajectory of his entire life, and that the woman in the Audi was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, watching him approach with the calm of someone watching weather through a window. She was in her early 40s, dark blazer, no visible reaction to the fact that a man was walking directly toward her door. That composure, for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, made everything worse. He knocked on the window. She lowered it 2 inches. "You saw my signal," he said. "I saw an open space," she replied. Her voice was even, unhurried, the voice of someone who had never once needed to rush. Something in Marcus broke loose, not loudly. He wasn't a man who shouted in public, had never been, but clearly, precisely, with the full weight of everything he'd been holding since 5 that morning. "People like you," he said, "you move through the world like the rules are just suggestions, like your time matters more because your car costs more. There are people in this garage who actually need to be somewhere, who don't get to just—" He gestured at her, at the Audi, at the effortless ease of her. "Absorb the consequences for other people because it's inconvenient." She looked at him, not through him, not past him, at him. The kind of look that cataloged and filed and drew no visible conclusion. "Are you finished?" she said. He wasn't, but he also had 6 minutes left and a meeting to catch. He stepped back, got in his car, moved it out of her way, and drove up to level 3 where he found a spot wedged between a support pillar and an SUV. He jogged to the stairwell. He did not look back. He was still catching his breath when the elevator opened into the Nexum lobby. He heard the room before he fully saw it. A low murmur of 200 employees gathered in the atrium for the all-hands, chairs arranged in rows, the AV team running last-minute checks on the screen at the front. Marcus moved toward the edge of the crowd, scanning for his team, and that was when he saw the banner, floor to ceiling, stretched across the full width of the reception wall. "Welcome CEO Naomi Sinclair, Nexum Group." And below the text, a photograph. Her photograph. The same composed face, the same dark blazer, the same expression that gave nothing away. Marcus stood completely still while the lobby continued to move around him. He had known Nexum was bringing in a new CEO. He had read her name in the company-wide announcement. He had simply never connected the name to a face, because he had never had reason to. He had reason now. An executive assistant materialized at his shoulder. "Mr. Reeves, Ms. Sinclair has brief one-on-ones scheduled this afternoon with department leads. You're confirmed at 4. He nodded, said something appropriate, walked to his seat. For the next 40 minutes, Naomi Sinclair stood at the front of the room and addressed the company with the precision and authority of someone who had spent 2 decades earning the right to stand exactly there. She was sharp. She was clear. She did not perform warmth she didn't feel, and somehow that made her more credible, not less. She did not look at Marcus once, which either meant she hadn't recognized him, or she had recognized him immediately and had already decided exactly how she was going to handle it. He spent the rest of the morning figuring out which one scared him more. By 3:50, he had made his decision. He could walk into that 4 o'clock meeting, say nothing, and hope she let it go. Keep his head down, protect the promotion, pretend the parking garage hadn't happened, and bet everything on her willingness to do the same. Or he could say something true. He had done a lot of things since Dana died. Exhausted, stretched thin, sometimes desperate in ways he'd never let Sophie see. But he had not been dishonest. He was not going to start today. He knocked on the open door of her office at 4 o'clock exactly. Naomi Sinclair was at her desk, reading something, and she looked up with the same expression she'd worn through the window of the Audi, attentive, giving nothing away. "Mr. Reeves," she said. "I owe you an apology," Marcus said. He stepped inside, kept his posture straight, his voice level. "The way I spoke to you this morning, that was out of line and I'm sorry for it." He paused. "But I'm not going to pretend the situation was fair, because it wasn't. I don't think you'd respect me more for pretending." The silence that followed lasted long enough that he counted 4 seconds in his head. Then Naomi Sinclair set down her pen, leaned back slightly in her chair, and looked at him. Not the way she'd looked at an inconvenience through a car window, but with something sharper and more deliberate. "Sit down, Mr. Reeves," she said. The meeting lasted 22 minutes. Naomi asked him 3 questions about the operations division. Specific, technical, the kind that couldn't be answered with talking points. Marcus answered all 3 directly without hedging, and when he disagreed with one of her preliminary assessments, he said so and explained why. She listened. She didn't argue. She made a note on the legal pad to her left and moved to the next question. When it was over, she stood, which meant he stood. "I'll be restructuring the project leads for the Operational Realignment Initiative," she said. "I want you on the core team. You'll hear from my office by end of week." He walked back to his desk, not entirely sure what had just happened. The call came Thursday morning. By Friday, Marcus was sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the executive floor with 4 other people he'd never worked with directly, a whiteboard covered in org charts, and a project scope that represented the largest internal restructuring Nexum had attempted in 7 years. Naomi ran the kickoff herself. She was organized, demanding, and moved through the room with a quality of attention that made people sharper just by being in proximity to it, as though sloppiness would simply not survive her presence long enough to matter. Marcus noticed the way she worked. He suspected she noticed the way he did too. By the end of the second week, the careful formality that most people maintained around her had become, between the two of them, something more functional. A shorthand built from shared late evenings in the conference room, disagreements that resolved faster than they should have, and the specific ease of 2 people who were both too tired for performance. He told her about Sophie once, by accident. He'd had to step out of a Thursday evening session to take a call from the school nurse. Nothing serious, a mild episode, Sophie was fine. And when he came back and explained the interruption, he watched Naomi's expression shift by a single, carefully controlled degree. "Is she all right?" she asked. "She's fine," he said. "She's always fine, she just—" He stopped. "She doesn't like to make a fuss." Naomi looked at him for a moment. "She sounds like someone I'd respect," she said, and returned to the whiteboard. It was a small thing. He thought about it longer than he should have. The talk started in the 3rd week. Marcus heard it first from his colleague James at the coffee station. Not malicious, just the low-level ambient noise of a large office processing something it didn't understand. "Did you hear Reeves got pulled onto Sinclair's core team? Wasn't even on the original list." Then a version with a sharper edge. Apparently she noticed him before the all-hands. Nobody knows how. Then the version that required no imagination at all. "I mean, look at him. Look at her. You do the math." He let it go the first week. The second week it got harder because the version circulating had evolved. Now it had a shape and a logic, and the particular staying power of a story that was impossible to definitively disprove. The whispers followed him into meetings, into the elevator, into the silence when he walked into a room and conversation reset a half-second later than it should have. He said nothing. He did the work. He told himself results were the only language that outlasted rumor. At home, the cost of the long hours showed up differently. Sophie had stopped mentioning the recital he'd missed. She had started leaving his coffee ready in the morning before he was awake. 8 years old, standing on her step stool to reach the machine, leaving him a note with a drawing of the two of them that she folded into a small square and tucked under the mug. He kept every one of them in the kitchen drawer. He did not look at them on hard days because he didn't trust what they did to his resolve. The midpoint arrived on a Wednesday evening in November, when everyone else had gone home. Marcus was still at the conference table with a revised logistics model spread across 3 monitors when Naomi came back from a board pre-briefing, jacket off, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the executive lounge like it was a perfectly ordinary thing to do. She set one in front of him without asking and took her seat across the table. They worked in parallel for a while, comfortable in a way neither of them acknowledged. Then Naomi said without looking up from her screen, "How long ago did you lose her?" He didn't ask how she knew. 3 years, he said. October. She nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." "You get used to the shape of it," he said. Then, "No, that's not right. You get used to moving around it." She was quiet for a moment, then, "I've been at this company for 6 weeks and I've had exactly 4 conversations that weren't about leverage." She said it flatly, not asking for sympathy. "You're the only person on this floor who tells me when I'm wrong." "You're usually not wrong," he said. "That's not the point," she looked up. "The point is that everyone else has already decided they'd rather be safe than useful." He looked at her, this woman who had walked into the most visible seat in the company and made it look like control while clearly paying a price for it that nobody was supposed to see. "That must be lonely," he said. She held his gaze for a beat too long. Then she looked back at her screen. "Get some sleep, Marcus," she said quietly. "Sophie needs her father functional." He drove home with both hands on the wheel and told himself it was nothing. He almost believed it. Derek Holt introduced himself to Marcus 3 days later in the lobby with a handshake that lasted a second too long and a smile that arrived slightly before the warmth did. He was 60-something, silver-haired, with the settled authority of a man who had occupied boardrooms long enough to believe they belonged to him. Vice president of the board. He had backed a different candidate for CEO before Naomi's appointment came through. Marcus had heard that much through the office grapevine. "Marcus Reeves," Holt said, as though tasting the name. "You've made quite an impression on our new CEO." "I'm doing my job," Marcus said. "Of course you are," Holt smiled again. "Just be careful that people can see it clearly. Proximity to power can blur optics. You understand." It wasn't a threat. It was something more refined than a threat. A warning delivered with just enough plausible goodwill that refusing it would make Marcus seem paranoid. He recognized the architecture of it. He thanked Holt for the advice and walked away. That same week, a piece appeared in the company's internal communications channel. Anonymous, technical in tone, but precise. A set of questions about whether the composition of the realignment core team reflected objective criteria or personal discretion. No names. Just questions. The kind that didn't need answers because the damage was already done in the asking. The talk shifted. It wasn't just ambient noise anymore. Now it had a source, and the source had a strategy. Marcus and Naomi did not discuss it directly. They didn't need to. They both understood what was happening, and they both understood with the particular clarity of people who had survived difficult things before that the most dangerous move was to react. But the distance came anyway. Not by agreement, by the slow, mutual pressure of 2 people who could see exactly how the story would be written if they kept standing close together, and neither of them was willing to make the other pay for it. Naomi stopped staying late when he was there. He stopped bringing her coffee from the machine down the hall. The shorthand disappeared first, then the easy silences, then the disagreements that used to resolve themselves before they fully formed. The work continued. It was the only thread left between them, and they both pulled it tight. Marcus told himself it was the right call. He told himself that discipline was a form of care. He told himself a lot of things on the drive home each night, while Sophie slept in the back seat with her backpack in her lap. And he believed most of them until he pulled into the driveway and turned the engine off and sat in the dark for a moment too long. The call came on a Tuesday at 2 a.m. Sophie's breathing had been off since dinner. He'd noticed it, Told himself it was mild. Told himself the new inhaler was doing its job. He was wrong on both counts. By midnight, she was struggling, and by 2, she was in the back of an Uber to St. Catherine's Medical Center with her face pressed into his shoulder and her small hand wrapped around 2 of his fingers. The ER was fast. The diagnosis was not what he'd feared at the extreme end, but it was serious. A significant bronchial episode requiring IV treatment and a minimum 3-night monitored stay. The attending physician told him that the delayed follow-up with Dr. Harmon had likely been a contributing factor. Marcus nodded. He already knew. He sat in the chair next to Sophie's bed while she slept with monitors clipped to her and fluorescent light humming overhead, and the night settled into the kind of quiet that had no mercy in it. His phone buzzed at 9 the next morning. Not a call, a notification from the hospital billing portal. He opened it expecting a preliminary estimate that would take his breath away. Balance due, $0. Account settled in full. He sat forward, checked the date, checked it again. The payment had posted overnight, an external account he didn't recognize, flagged in the system as a charitable trust he'd never heard of. He closed the app, opened it again. The number didn't change. An hour later, a second message arrived from his own attorney. The Whitfield family's latest legal filing had stalled. Their supporting documentation had been challenged on procedural grounds by a respondent legal team he hadn't retained. The challenge was precise and comprehensive. Whoever had filed it knew exactly what they were doing. There was no name attached to either development. There never would be. Marcus set the phone face down on his knee and looked at Sophie, small and pale against the hospital pillow, breathing steadily now, one hand curled under her cheek. He thought about what Naomi had said weeks ago in an empty conference room. The point is that everyone else has already decided they'd rather be safe than useful. She hadn't done this to create a debt. He understood that with the specific clarity of a man who had just had the thing he was most afraid of addressed without being asked. She had done it because she could, and because she thought it was right, and she had made sure her name was nowhere on it. And somehow, that was the part that undid him completely. He did not open the resignation form he had been drafting in his head for 3 days. Instead, he sat in the fluorescent quiet next to his daughter and tried to figure out what kind of man he wanted to be when the morning came. Sophie was discharged on a Friday morning, small and tired and carrying a new inhaler in her jacket pocket like a talisman. On the drive home, she fell asleep before they reached the highway. Marcus kept both hands on the wheel and let the silence do what it needed to do. 3 days in a hospital room had a way of clarifying things, burning off everything that wasn't essential until what remained was just the bare structure of what mattered and what didn't. What mattered? Sophie, breathing steadily in the back seat. What he was done with, making himself smaller than he needed to be. He went back to work on Monday. He had expected things to feel different, smaller maybe, or more fragile after the sleepless nights at St. Catherine's. Instead, he walked into the Nexum Tower and felt something settle in his chest like a counterweight dropping into place. He had almost walked away from this. He had sat in a hospital chair and come within 3 form fields of disappearing from his own life because he was afraid of what it would cost to stay in it. He was done with that kind of arithmetic. He went directly to the executive floor. Naomi's assistant looked up. "Mr. Reeves, she's in with legal until 10. "I'll wait," he said, and sat down in the chair across from the assistant's desk with his hands on his knees, and waited. She came out of the conference room at 10:12, mid-sentence with a lawyer who stopped talking when she saw Marcus stand up. Naomi's expression moved through 3 things very quickly. Surprise, something more careful, then the composure she wore like a second skin, and she turned to the lawyer. "We'll continue this afternoon," she said. The lawyer gathered his files and left. Naomi looked at Marcus. "My office," she said. He didn't sit down this time, neither did she. "I know what you did," he said. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't perform confusion or deflect with professionalism. She just looked at him with that direct, cataloging attention and waited. "Sophie's bill," he said. "The charitable trust. The legal team that appeared out of nowhere to push back on the Whitfield filing." He kept his voice steady. I've been in operations long enough to know how to follow a paper trail, Naomi. It was the first time he had used her name without a title attached. Neither of them acknowledged it. I know it was you. It wasn't a transaction, she said. Her voice was even, but something underneath it was not. I know that too. He moved to the window, turned back. That's why I'm here. Because if it had been a transaction, if there was a scoreboard involved, I could have handed you a check and walked away clean. He stopped. But you did it so I wouldn't even know to feel indebted. And I've been trying to figure out what to do with that since Wednesday morning. What did you decide? She asked. That I've been making myself smaller than I need to be, he said. Not for Sophie, not for the promotion. I've been doing it because somewhere along the line I convinced myself that wanting something for me, not just for her, was a liability I couldn't afford. He looked at her directly. I'm tired of that math. Naomi was quiet for a moment. Then she walked to her desk, not to sit behind it, but to stand beside it. And she crossed her arms in a way that was less defensive than grounded, like she was holding herself together in the precise amount that was necessary. I've run 3 companies, she said. I have been in rooms where I was the only woman and told myself it didn't affect me. I have made decisions that cost me things I didn't let myself grieve because grieving them would mean admitting I wanted them in the first place. She paused. I don't know how to do this, Marcus. I want to be honest about that. I don't know how to want something I can't control the outcome of. Neither do I, he said. I have a kid and a job and I'm still figuring out how to sleep through the night. I'm not offering you certainty. Then what are you offering? He considered the question the way he considered everything, squarely, without flinching. Honesty, he said, and the kind of respect that doesn't disappear when it's inconvenient. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it, not empty, loaded with weight and direction. Then Naomi said, "We have a problem to solve first." His name was Derek Holt, and he had been patient and methodical, and he had underestimated Marcus Reeves in the specific way that powerful men underestimated people they considered temporary. Marcus had spent the 3 days at St. Catherine's doing 2 things: sitting with Sophie and thinking. By the time she was discharged, he had mapped the full architecture of what Holt had done. The anonymous internal piece, the board conversations, the careful cultivation of an optics problem designed to destabilize Naomi's position without leaving fingerprints. It was clean work. It was also, from an operational standpoint, the kind of structural manipulation that left traces if you knew where to look. Marcus knew where to look. He spent the following week building the case the same way he built operations models, methodic, without ego, letting the data carry the argument. Procurement irregularities on a subsidiary contract that Holt had quietly steered. A pattern of communications designed to slow the restructuring initiative, timed precisely to maximize uncertainty during Naomi's first quarter. 2 board members who had received information that could only have come from within the executive floor. He brought it to Naomi on a Thursday afternoon in a folder with no cover page. She read through it without expression. When she finished, she set it on the desk and was quiet for a long moment. "This is solid," she said. "It's complete," he said. "You can take it to the full board or handle it in committee. Either way, he doesn't have a move left. You did this while Sophie was in the hospital." I had a lot of quiet hours. She looked at him with something that lived in the space between gratitude and recognition. The look of a person seeing clearly something they had suspected for a long time, but never allowed themselves to name. The board meeting happened on a Tuesday. Marcus was not in the room. It wasn't his seat, and he didn't pretend otherwise. But Naomi walked in with the folder and the composure of someone who had already won the argument before it began. And 3 hours later, Derek Holt submitted his resignation from the board, effective immediately, citing personal reasons. The internal communications piece disappeared from the company channel without explanation. Nobody publicly connected the 2 events. Nobody needed to. 2 weeks later, Naomi stood in front of the full operations division and walked through the results of the realignment initiative. Efficiency gains of 23% across logistics, a restructured vendor framework that had already saved the company $4 million in the first quarter, and a new senior leadership structure that reflected actual performance rather than inherited hierarchy. She announced the promotion of Marcus Reeves to Senior Director of Operations. There was applause. Most of it was genuine. A few people in the room had the particular expression of people recalibrating a story they had already told themselves, and Marcus noted them without satisfaction. He shook hands, said the right things, and went back to his desk. At 4:30, he got a text from Sophie. "How did it go, Daddy?" He typed back, "Pretty good. Want tacos tonight?" Her reply was 7 taco emojis and a heart, which he took as a yes. The conflict of interest question was handled the way it should have been handled. Directly, without drama, in a brief conversation with HR and legal that established a formal protocol. Marcus reported to the COO, not to the CEO. His performance reviews involved an independent committee. The structure was clean, documented, and left nothing open to interpretation. As for the Whitfield family, the legal challenge had quietly dissolved once Marcus's new title, salary, and documented stability were placed on record. Robert and Claire hadn't pursued it further. Maybe they'd never truly intended to. Or maybe they simply recognized, as people sometimes did when confronted with evidence, that the man raising their granddaughter was exactly who he had always been.
You don't have to turn around.
It was not a perfect ending. It was a real one. That distinction, Marcus had come to understand, was the one that actually mattered. It was a Thursday morning in January when Naomi found him in the parking garage.
I'll be right behind
Not by accident. She had looked for him, had learned his schedule the way she learned everything she decided was worth knowing. Quietly, thoroughly, without announcing it. He was walking to the elevator, coffee in one hand, Sophie's folded note from that morning in his jacket pocket. He heard footsteps behind him and turned. Naomi Sinclair, no blazer, hands in her coat pockets, looking at him the way she had looked at him across a conference table at 11 p.m. when everyone else had gone home and there was no performance left to give. "I wanted to see if it would feel different," she said, "being here." He looked around the garage, the low concrete ceiling, the fluorescent hum, the faint smell of exhaust and cold air. "Does it?" he asked. She considered it seriously, the way she considered everything. "Yes," she said. "It feels like a beginning instead of a collision." He smiled, the kind that had nothing behind it except itself. No exhaustion, no calculation, no weight of everything that could go wrong. Just the clean, simple fact of it. "Sophie asks about you," he said. "She wants to meet the woman her dad talked about." Naomi raised an eyebrow slightly. "What did you tell her?" "That you're someone worth knowing," he said, "and that I was going to let her decide for herself." They walked to the elevator together, not as CEO and senior director, not as a scandal or a story or a set of optics to be managed. Just two people who had earned the right to stand in the same space without apology, moving toward the same door. The elevator opened. They stepped in. Behind them, the parking garage was just a parking garage. Concrete and fluorescent light, and the ordinary morning of an ordinary day. Unremarkable in every way except that it was where everything had started. And now it was where something else was beginning. Marcus Reeves had walked into that garage 11 months ago with everything on the line and nothing left to lose. He had been angry and exhausted and more afraid than he'd let anyone see. Afraid of failing Sophie, afraid of being overlooked, afraid that the version of himself that was still standing after everything he'd lost wasn't quite enough. What changed wasn't the circumstances. The bills were still real. The long hours were still real. The world still had plenty of people in it who would look at him and do the math in exactly the wrong way. What changed was that he stopped doing that math himself. That's what this story is really about. Not the parking space, not the promotion, not even the love story. It's about what happens when you stop shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for you, and start taking up exactly the room you've earned. If that hit home for you, subscribe and turn on notifications. We tell stories like this every week. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, send it to them. Sometimes the right story finds you at exactly the right moment. See you next time.